In the last video, we discussed how metaphysics offers a grounded certainty by establishing conditions that limit what can appear, relegating all that does not conform as fundamentally unknowable and nonsensical. The subject in its synthesizing function deploys these conditions, representing phenomena to itself as objects of knowledge. The analysis of Pollock's painting exposes the limitations of this philosophical orientation. The effect of the painting upon me, which other systems of thought flee from, is the origin of thought itself. However, appreciating that analysis requires overcoming some rather recalcitrant presuppositions. First among them is a radical divide between the flux of appearances and an unchanging reality. The history of philosophy may be characterized, and not without some oversimplification, as an extended, dynamic dialectic between those metaphysicians who seek a ground residing before, behind, or beyond the flux, and those skeptics who resign themselves to the impossibility of achieving certainty towards such a ground. Phenomenology, as the study of appearances, which the etymological root would suggest, attends to this flux, but neither embraces the proclaimed uncertainty of radical skepticism, nor grounds appearances in ideal transcendencies. Instead, it transgresses perceived impressions to return to the way these appearances, through their effectivity, arise in their original state of unconditional self-manifestation. The concept deployed by such a phenomenology is named Givenness. Givenness is the non-ground but absolute condition by which phenomena appear. In opposition to metaphysics, a phenomenology of Givenness establishes phenomena on their own terms, not in reference to preceding conditions, whether it be causes, principles of logic, or a priori concepts of the mind. Givenness itself is not a principle that precedes the phenomenon, rather it links what shows itself to what gives itself. Though denying itself any grounding, Givenness does proclaim a kind of certainty. This ungrounded certainty comes in the pure fact that something has shown itself, that an appearance has been made. In other words, it concerns the arriving, passing, and withdrawal of appearance in its act of appearing. For when one doubts, only a cause is doubted, not the facticity of the appearance itself. I may have mistakenly believed I was being chased, only to discover it was just a dream. But what I doubt is not the happening itself, that indeed I was being affected in a very particular manner. Rather, I doubt its ontological status, meaning, and causes. Upon awakening, I ask myself whether it really happened, that is, whether the experience took place in waking or dreaming. I ponder the meaning and source of the dream. Perhaps it represented an unconscious conflict, a working out of the day's worries, or even just random neural firings. You see, each time I doubt, I direct it at everything except the appearing of the phenomenon itself. And no amount of post hoc explanation can dissolve this unbidden arising. One may doubt interpretations, knowledge, and understanding about the appearance, but not that it appeared, nor that it came into appearance. Thus, what has served as the greatest source of skepticism, the appearance, is indeed the most indubitable possibility for thought, while what is often conferred the greatest certainty, the explanatory power of theoretical reason, is the most dubious of all. Skeptics have identified the flux as support for their position, but their uncertainty is not due to the flux itself, but to the conditions of production that turn that flux into a spectacle. A spectacle, however, appears according to the measure of the spectator's gaze. And that gaze, often unbeknown to itself, is in its own perpetual state of flux, maintaining a semblance of permanence for only so long before giving way to the next forms of objectification that attract it. Skepticism is merely the culmination of this activity, a gaze fatigued by its own misguided, ever-shifting search for permanence. Givenness is the principle that links the indubitable flux of appearance to its manner of appearing. It is the fold of the given phenomenon that shows itself from itself in its reception. This leads to the central principle of this phenomenology. What shows itself first gives itself. One begins with the surface of the given, the appearance as such. This, however, is no mere appearance. The surface of the given cannot be limited to sense data. What shows itself is not a static object, a spectacle, but a manner of arriving, the appearing of what appears. The initiative of this appearing always belongs to the phenomenon itself. There's no preceding condition, essential being, secret noumena, or representation that makes givenness possible. This is what it means for the phenomenon to give itself in showing itself. A showing could be interpreted in terms of causality, but it would obfuscate the intrinsic character of the phenomenon's arrival. Such was illustrated in my example of Pollock's painting when I discovered the origin of its effects within the showing of the painting itself, and from that could trace the invisible modes of its arrival as it imposed itself upon me. Though all that shows itself gives itself, it doesn't hold, however, that all that gives itself shows itself. This gap between showing and giving calls for two tasks. First, phenomenology begins with the surface of the given, what shows itself, and works backwards to arrive at givenness. Second, the work of hermeneutics assists the given to show itself. In other words, showing requires a capacity and willingness to receive the given and convert it into a phenomenon. This is performed by a finite self, situated in particular horizons of understanding. At first, this might seem like a contradiction. How can we reconcile the claim that the phenomenon shows itself from itself when it requires another for it to appear? Let's consider an example in which a friend comes to my door. I must decide whether to let him in when he arrives. At the same time, I would be unable to let him in if he hadn't come at all, or if he leaves before I open the door. Did my friend come on his own accord? Yes. Did he show himself upon opening the door? Yes. Did I have to open the door for my friend to appear to me? Yes. As will be discussed later when addressing the self who receives the given, we must bypass the binary of activity and passivity here, despite that being a point of contention often directed at this phenomenology. So the difficulty with givenness is perhaps not so much in acknowledging it, but in the relevance of what superficially seems so obvious and taken for granted. One could be left with the question, so what? That question can't be answered fully without turning to the phenomena themselves. This has always been the case for phenomenology, however, whose claims must be tested in the active fires of rigorous thinking. Phenomenology doesn't yield knowledge in the abstract. Rather, one must do phenomenology and behold the fruits it yields. This is the test of its principles. The challenge of conducting this test is that the given conceals givenness, and what we often begin with instead are the visible phenomena. Consequently, we must next consider the means for leading what shows itself back to the given, connecting the appearing with what appears. This requires employing a phenomenological reduction, and the more rigorously this reduction is accomplished, the more givenness we will discover. And that will be the topic of the next video. Thank you for watching. Please feel free to leave a comment or question down below, and I'll see you next time.